give me a thumbs up when you are ready. All right. Take it away, Joe.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. You know, missing in politics today is honesty. Honesty about what works, but also what doesn't work. And our country has been fighting the war against marijuana for decades. And it's time for elected officials to admit that what we are doing has not been working. Although there are career politicians who would rather live in the past, I prefer that we, as South Carolinians, look to the future. That is why I'm running for governor, to bring South Carolina out of the past and into the future. Our marijuana laws are stuck in the past. They aren't practical, and they hurt more people than they help. They're based on myths, prejudice, and fear. So I believe it's time to end the prohibition on marijuana in South Carolina. It's time to start regulating and taxing it. You see, for too many years, we've been burdened with the high cost of pursuing and incarcerating individuals for possession of marijuana and low-level drug arrest. Today, our state's murder rate has never been higher, and therefore, our law enforcement resources have never been more valuable. By legalizing and regulating marijuana, our law enforcement can focus on the violent crimes, and they can more effectively target dangerous criminals and get them off the street and keep them off the street. But refocusing our law enforcement resources is just one effect this policy will have. Another impact will be on our incredible veterans and any other person who's needlessly suffering through a chronic illness. While serving on the Veterans Affairs Committee in Congress, I heard firsthand from our nation's heroes. Nathan, an Army veteran in Dorchester County who served our country in Iraq, where he sustained a roadside bomb injury. You know, he told me that every night he relives that tragedy, and the only thing that can help him sleep at night is marijuana. There's also a story of a former Marine who was given a prescription for opioids for an injury, and then he refused to fill it because he was afraid that he would, just like thousands of others, fall into that cycle of addiction. He told me that what he wanted was the same thing that was legal in dozens of other states. You know, it's truly shameful that we ask these heroes to defend our freedoms abroad, promising them that we'll take care of them when they return, and then deny them that basic remedy that would help alleviate the pain that was incurred through their heroic acts. Or that our friends and family members who may be suffering through cancer or other chronic illness are denied the use of marijuana, which is proven to be a safer and more effective means of pain management. This is about compassion. And when it comes to our veterans, this is about taking care of those who've taken care of us. It's about taking care of our family, our friends, our neighbors, so that they don't suffer needlessly. Our marijuana laws continue to have a disproportionate impact on communities of color. A person of color is nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than someone who's white, even though they use marijuana at the same rate. Lives have been ruined over possession of small amounts of marijuana. And such arrests have turned thousands of South Carolinians into criminals when their acts would be completely legal in so many other states. And that makes it much more difficult for them to get a job, go to college, or get a loan. My proposal calls for expunging the records of anyone convicted of a low-level marijuana-related offense, giving people second chance at life. Expunging these records will allow countless South Carolinians to have a more productive and successful life for them and their families. Regulating and taxing marijuana would also generate tens of millions of dollars in new tax revenue, allowing our state to finally provide critical funding to fix our schools, fix our roads, expand Medicaid, give our hardworking teachers the pay raise that they deserve, or even substantially cut taxes on South Carolina families. While it's unclear just how much revenue would be generated by regulation and taxing, Oregon, which has an even smaller population than South Carolina, brought in $133 million in revenue from marijuana taxes in 2020 alone. We could do a lot of good and help a lot of people with that money. We should. The attitudes towards marijuana are evolving rapidly. Recent poll performed in April showed that 70% of Americans support legalizing marijuana, including 62% of Republicans and 67% of independents. The people are no longer divided on this issue. It's the politicians that haven't come around. Politicians like Henry McMaster, who've spent their entire careers perpetuating the myths about marijuana, scaring people into thinking that it's more dangerous than it is. And worst of all, keeping it out of the hands of the people that need it most. I think it's time to tell the truth, to be honest. This governor may be stuck in the past, but I'm not. The war on marijuana was never based on science or practical measures. It was based on fear. It was based on prejudice and lies. South Carolina needs leaders who will be honest. Honest about the failures of the war on marijuana. And honest about the cost of it too. I will be a governor who can admit when a policy fails, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the prohibition of marijuana has done exactly that. We owe this. We owe this to our men and women who have served our country bravely. We owe it to those who suffer chronic illnesses, who just want relief from their pain. We owe it to the communities of color that have been unfairly impacted by these archaic laws. And we owe it to our economy, our farmers, entrepreneurs, to not turn our back on this incredible financial opportunity. Ideas like these are the difference between a leader of the future and leaders who are stuck in the past. Now, it's my honor to introduce a good friend and powerful voice on this issue, the former United States Attorney for the state of South Carolina, Bill Nettles.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Bill Nettles. I am the former United States Attorney for District of South Carolina, which meant for 6.5 years I was the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer in South Carolina. I can tell you this, I mean, if not today, okay, most likely one day this week and definitely several days this month, there will be a helicopter flying around vacant land that's being paid for by state funds. And that helicopter is going to have 3 or 4 guys dressed up like they're going to war in it. And they're going to be flying around over vast expanses of undeveloped land in South Carolina, not looking for child pornographers, not looking for human traffickers, not looking for violent criminals, but looking for a plant. They're going to be looking for a plant that is legal in 16 states, completely legal, adult use for cannabis, and in 36 states for medical use. And let's take and that is for a plant. That money that's being used to fly that helicopter around, that money that's being used to maintain that helicopter, that money that's being used to pay the people dressed up like they're going to war in the helicopter, could be used to make our life safer. Each and every one of our lives safer. But it's not. because we asked them to do that. And that's the one thing I want all of y'all to understand about law enforcement, who is somewhat understandably hesitant on this issue. I can tell you this as someone who's been in law enforcement. It is not a unanimous voice that is against cannabis from within law enforcement. But those that are adamant about it, it's because it's what they've done almost their whole adult life. And so we asked them to go do this, and now we're asking them to stop. Right? Let's look at, I mean, if this were like a forward, this isn't even a forward-thinking idea anymore, y'all. Alabama and Mississippi, let me say that again. Alabama and Mississippi are both moving the ball further than we are on this issue. Virginia, southern state, just legalized it. All right? West Virginia, the Republican governor of West Virginia, who is, you know, rightly or wrongly, an adamant Trump supporter, he advocated for medical marijuana in West Virginia. Why? Because he saw what opioids was doing to his state. This wasn't an abstract issue to him. This was a very real issue. And you know what they've gotten? They've gotten real results in West Virginia. They've seen opioid use drop, which also saves money on Medicare and Medicaid. All right? So we are not, this isn't one of those wacky ideas that's come in from out west. This is an idea, you know, 5 years ago it was an idea whose time has come. Now it's an idea that we need to catch up on. All right? Look, I don't know what the tax amount of money that will be, that we can bring in from this, but let me talk to you about this. Of the 36 states that have either got medical or adult use on cannabis, name me one single one of those states that has tried to rescind it. And you know why that is? Because every single state that has taken the steps like what Joe wants to do, they have been not only happy about it, but they've moved forward. None of the states have, there's no movement to rescind any of this. And what does that tell you? It works. All right? When you talk to law enforcement in the areas that have adult use and even medical, they will say this. All right? They will say that the world is a little bit safer, contrary to what the less enlightened law enforcement have you believe. You're going to hear, I mean, I can't tell you, when I was U.S. Attorney, I heard from people, and especially veterans, all right, with PTSD or anybody with chronic pain. This is something that works. And it doesn't have the harm that a lot of the pharmaceuticals do. And lastly, but not leastly, you know, my granddad owned a farm machinery dealership. I grew up in a family of farmers, all right? It's a rough way to make a living, and it ain't getting any easier. But it's something we can do here. And it's something we can do here and make good, solid money. So literally, whenever I think about this issue, it's hard for me to understand why we're even having to advocate for it, because they should be advocating why we don't have it. Because it literally doesn't make sense to make cannabis illegal in South Carolina. At this time, I think I've got the privilege to turn this over to Donald Howell, who is both a veteran and a registered nurse, which obviously gives him a great depth to speak on this.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Don Howell. As I was introduced, I am a veteran of the United States Navy. I was a Navy corpsman where I rendered medical care to the Marine Corps in the battlefield. They called us combat docs. During that time frame, I was awarded the Purple Heart in combat action, and I'm currently working as a nurse where I've taken care of civilians as well as veterans. Now, I've suffered with PTSD for 38 years. Now, something I want to mention really quickly. The care for veterans when it comes to PTSD has increased exponentially over the 38 years that I've possessed it. And it's important to know that we want our veterans to seek care as quickly as possible. Now, we're talking about cannabis in this particular talk, and I want to do a little housekeeping. It's important that veterans, and I know that they tend to self-medicate themselves in order to mitigate the pain that they suffer from PTSD. But I want to tell my vet brothers and sisters that it's important for you to build a dialogue with your physician, an open, non-judgmental dialogue, and openly discuss what you are doing in terms of illegal substances in order to mitigate the problems that you tend to have with PTSD. I just want to put that out there first. As you know, the Biden administration is ending the longest war in U.S. history. What this translates into is that there's going to be thousands of veterans who will also suffer from PTSD. And my hope during this talk is that they won't have to wait as long as I have in order to get definitive care. PTSD symptoms include a major depressive disorders, anxiety, stress, overwhelming insomnia, and mood regulations and substance abuse. Now let me break a few things down. Veterans with PTSD commit suicide of upwards to 17 to 20 persons per day because of PTSD. One of the driving factors is the major depressive disorder. And what drives that is a lack of sleep. You may see a lot of veterans who may use cannabis illegally, but in majority, they do this in order to have sleep, in order to fend off the negative effects of PTSD, such as overwhelming insomnia and mood dysregulation. We are often given medications, psychological medications, that help with PTSD. But those medications take sometimes 30 days to 120 days to kick in. Now, back to the suicide. Suicide is basically driven from depression. You're so depressed that you can't get off the floor or out of the bed. But when you're given the traditional medication, it takes 30 days to kick in. But there's a sticking point. There's a moment during that 30 days, 120 days, where you begin to feel a little bit better. And you can get out of bed. You can get out of bed and you feel well enough to kill yourself. That's one of the sticking points between that 30 and 120 days. One of the beauties of utilizing cannabis is its rapid onset, 10 to 15 minutes. And immediately you'll feel alleviation of mood dysregulation. You'll feel better about yourself. And more than anything else, it alleviates stress and allows you to get sleep. Sleep, again, is one of the driving factors of depression. We as veterans feel a sense of shortened future, never expecting to be married, and these are the symptoms of PTSD. Both in our careers and relationships, we're plagued with strife and mental confusion, unprovoked anger, negative thoughts of conspiracy against us, and negative thoughts about ourselves. Now, in a work environment, employers may see our behavior as being disruptive or inconducive to a safe and peaceful, harmonious work environment. But these are just symptoms of PTSD. We have problems dealing with current situations. And once our employers and our families view us as that disruptive, that angry person, then we're shunned. We divorce. Life doesn't smile upon us as it would a normal person. So it's important for us to understand that veterans suffer in all aspects of their lives. Veterans with PTSD don't always fully recover. So that means that they're going to have care for the rest of their lives. They're going to be dealing with PTSD for the rest of their lives, and they require care for the rest of their lives. And they'll seek medications for coping, alcohol, other drugs, to alleviate those aforementioned symptoms. So it's important that we understand the psychological issues that we suffer and while living with PTSD. In the past, we have been prescribed medications to mitigate hyperarousal, nightmares, and moods. The medications come with side effects ranging from intolerable drowsiness, confusion, sexual dysfunction, anxiety, and insomnia. Furthermore, some of these medications take a long time, as I mentioned before, in order for it to kick in. An important thing about veterans or people in active duty, there's a moment called mail call. And it's probably one of the best times when you're in active duty and you're deployed. You get that letter from home. And you should see these guys when they receive these letters. I mean, it puts a smile on their face, it turns their life around. And of course, these letters are about the dog who may have messed up mom's carpet, or how your little brother may have wrecked the car. They may seem trivial to you, but they mean the world to us. That letter from home is something that we cherish, and we ask that in order to make cannabis legal, our legislators have to move forward and understand the needs of the veteran and the importance of the traditional medications and then what we have today. And of course, the utilization of cannabis and how it can help. So it's important that the rapid onset and alleviation of symptoms that involve mood dysregulations and sleep are the driving factors for the utilization of cannabis for those veterans who use it illegally. As lawmakers, you can make the suffering of veterans better. It's important as lawmakers to make the impossible possible. After all, that's your job. We ask South Carolinians, because I understand there's a referendum a couple of years ago. We asked South Carolinians, whether they wanted cannabis in the state of South Carolina, and overwhelmingly there was a 70 to 80% agreement. Of course, our lawmakers never brought that to the table, and they never moved forward with it. So we ask that one last letter from home from you South Carolinians. Write that letter to your congressman, to your senator, for your veterans. Write that letter, that one last letter from home, because we're going to have a lot of veterans that are coming home from Afghanistan, and some of those people will not seek medical help. So by legalizing cannabis, it will give them an alternative to the medications that we presently have with rapid onset. And that will buy time for them to heal. And particularly if we can get these veterans into the hospital and treated early, then they won't have long-term effects that I tend to have, because it's harder to treat when you don't treat PTSD for a very long time. If it is possible for any of you South Carolinians to lean in to your lawmakers, ask them why. Because the reasons why they tend to shun cannabis are for reasons that are not true. The endocannabinoid system is a system that we have in our system, just like our blood system or integumentary system. And what it does is it helps regulate our mood, fear. The cannabis plant works homogeneously with it. So bearing that in mind, when you speak to your lawmakers, whatever they say in terms of it being a gateway drug is not true. and the side effects that you tend to have from other medications, including alcohol, doesn't exist because there's a harmonious connection between the endocannabinoid systems, the one that you already possess, and the phytocannabinoid system, which is in the plant. So once again, thank you for having me. Thank you for listening to the voice of the veteran, and I hope that all of you would lean into your lawmakers to ensure that this law is turned around and made legal. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to invite up to the podium to Jason.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Ergel, and I am a proud South Carolinian, born and raised here. Today is a great day in South Carolina. My father, Jesse Ergel, worked his entire career for the state of South Carolina with the Clemson Extension Service. And when he contracted stage 4 cancer in 2016, my family was obviously devastated. We watched the cancer and the chemotherapy lay waste to his body. He fought for 5 brave months to spend as much time with the family he loved as he could. He was a law-abiding citizen of South Carolina, but based on my recommendation and with so much initial hesitation and feelings of guilt, he began to use marijuana. He began to use it to help his appetite and his pain. When our family went to the doctor shortly thereafter, we were sad his critical cell count was going the wrong direction. But we were overjoyed when we saw he gained almost 10 pounds shortly after starting to use marijuana. It is a shame he had to feel guilty about trying to use a plant that is good and that God gave us, to use it to help him feel better. How dare our government officials try to get between God's plants and someone who is doing no harm by using them for some relief during a painful struggle. I take, in memory of my father, personal exception with Attorney General Alan Wilson saying marijuana is the most dangerous drug in America. I have great respect for the medical community, but the 100% actual true facts are that the medical community has killed tens of thousands of people annually due to overprescription and overdose of opioids. And that is due to a corrupt system of influence from billions of dollars from pharmaceutical companies. All the while, not a single person has ever died from an overdose of marijuana. Again, I take, and maybe my father, personal exception, that Alan Wilson says marijuana is the most dangerous drug in America. My fellow South Carolinians, that is a lie. He lied to all of you. In 2016, I began to work with many other brave South Carolinians to help obtain a legal path to hemp cultivation in our state. We succeeded after a tough battle against the rampant corruption within our state. I wanted to pick up where my dad left off, helping farmers, Clemson Extension in South Carolina. I wanted to help struggling farmers in our state. I wanted to give them the option to grow another one of God's plants, to help with their decreasing revenues and decreasing margins. It's a clean plant that can help rejuvenate the soil. I am a fierce independent. I am proud of this man right here behind me on stage, Joe Cunningham. I am proud of his courage to tackle the corruption that has led to a completely immoral prohibition of one of God's plants. Agriculture is the largest industry in our state, and the potential revenues and tax windfall that are seen in other states from one of God's plants could greatly help our state economy and our agricultural industry recover. My fellow South Carolinians, there is no logical reason to continue the prohibition of one of God's plants. And anyone who tells you different is lying to you. Joe Cunningham is telling you the truth. Please, my fellow South Carolinians, support Joe Cunningham for governor, and please help us end prohibition on one of God's plans. Thank you.
Happy to open up to any questions?
Hey,
Hey, Thomas.
quick question for you. So, similar to last month, we talked about the plan to curb gun violence. So much of what you're proposing involves the state house,
Mhm.
and right now it's controlled by the GOP. How would you convince a lot of lawmakers who have very actively said that they're not going to support a lot of marijuana legislation? I think in the past couple of years we've only passed one bill, which is just related to CBD. What's the secret sauce to getting something like this done?
Leadership. Leadership is the critical component, and right now we don't have it in the governor's office. And I'll just point to my past track record. And I spent the last 2 years in Congress. Had two of my bills, two of them, make it through a divided Congress and get signed into law by a Republican president. Many lawmakers go their entire lives without having one single bill signed into law, and I had two. I would also say that, as Bill pointed out, this is an idea whose not only its time has come, but that we're catching up to. And public opinion is behind this as well. I know that for a fact. We're doing a 46 county tour where we're going to every single corner of the state, and one thing is consistent. South Carolinians are with us on this. They're with us, period. And if the politicians in Columbia don't want to be a true reflection of the will of the constituents, then we need new politicians. And that's the truth. That if they're not going to support it, then I imagine we have elections to cure problems like this. And that's exactly what will happen.
If marijuana becomes legal in the state of South Carolina, how will y'all regulate marijuana growth for future farmers?
Yeah, and as we talked about earlier, and there are many states have done this already, and so the blueprints are there. But this is something that needs to be prioritized for farmers in South Carolina, and we need to give priority to them. Maybe different credits or otherwise for marijuana that's produced in the state. But this is an economic opportunity. Not just for the taxes that they're going to be generated, but for the jobs it's going to create. The entrepreneurs, the farmers. As Bill mentioned, farming is not getting any easier. And as we travel the state, talked to a lot of folks who are family farmers, and they've told us their children and grandchildren won't be going into this industry because of how tough it is. We need to make it a little bit easier. This is just one way in which we can do that.
Earlier today, a spokesman for Governor McMaster said that the governor opposed it completely recreationally, and then would be open to it medicinally if it was easy for law enforcement and they felt comfortable regulating that, taking control of that and such. So I just wanted to pose the question to you. Have you spoken with law enforcement officers about this? Do you feel like the state law enforcement could handle the legalization of marijuana? And also, just to clarify, are you for recreationally and medicinally?
Yeah, we need to provide clarity to folks, and the only way to do that is by moving forward with full regulation and taxation of it. And as far as the governor's position on this, it's obvious that he's stuck in the past on this. We have Alabama and Mississippi getting ahead of us on issues like this, and it's because we have somebody in the governor's office who's been in politics for longer than I've been alive. As to law enforcement, we just heard from the former United States Attorney for South Carolina talking about the benefits of this. My dad was a former prosecutor, and he would tell me that never did he prosecute a violent offender who was just solely using marijuana. The fact is that this is going to refocus our law enforcement resources on violent offenders, violent criminals, and get them off the street. And at a time when our state's murder rate has never been higher, we're proposing solutions. We're proposing ideas and ways to fix this. Contrast that with what's coming from the governor's mansion, crickets. And Bill, I'll leave it to you if you want to add anything on the law enforcement aspect of it.
I don't want to be blunt about this, but let's be clear. Their title is law enforcement, right? Not law promulgation. Okay? And so we've got this Constitution that divides up people's jobs. All right? And as far as policy goes, law enforcement is an individual vote by that individual law enforcement person. So what we ought to be doing is asking law enforcement to get in their lane. And that's why they're called law enforcement, not law promulgation. All right? So, look, it is a misnomer that law enforcement is lockstep behind making cannabis illegal. That is a notion that went out sometime around the 60s. Okay? So now what you find is if you go to places where law enforcement is enforcing the laws that allow legal cannabis, you talk to them and you know what they're going to tell you? It's really not a problem. It's not a big deal. All right? So I think that we've got a Constitution, we've got division of powers, and they've got their lane, and law promulgators have got their lane. I hope that wasn't too blunt, but I feel pretty strong.
And this is,
Amen. Amen.
and going back to what I said earlier is that we need elected officials who are going to be honest people about what works and what doesn't work. And you cannot tell me that after decades of fighting this war on marijuana that we're seeing true results. The fact is, use is just as prevalent as it was decades ago, if not more. And so we have to admit when a policy has failed and figure out how to take this challenge and turn it into an opportunity.
And as you say, support for legalizing marijuana has grown over the years. Would you say the opioid crisis has played a huge role in that?
I would say so. Especially it's hard to imagine how something like that is legal and while we're throwing people in jail for something that's legal in other states. As we struggle and as was mentioned here today by Mr. Howe, as more of our veterans come back from fighting in foreign battlefields, we need to make sure they have safe alternatives here at home. And when they come back to South Carolina, they don't have a safe alternative to opioids. We're trying to break that addiction. We're trying to break that cycle and providing solutions. And Governor McMaster and the politicians in Columbia are just standing in the way of that.
One more, guys.
Appreciate you all coming here.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much.